Good. So far, so good. Yeah. I think my guarantee is up. You know. Well,
we're going to keep you even if the warranty has.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, you know, I'm grateful to everyone that's here. At one point, we didn't think this day would ever come because we, you know, specifically were interested, and because of my life, and I'll just tell you the sequence of things. Going to medical school in 1954 was really a unique experience because of the respect that we received from the faculty. The dean of admissions was Jack Coy, who was a Harvard-trained internist, and he personally conducted every interview. In 1954, we were still seeing people who got their education after World War II. One of the people in my class was a 19-year-old during the war. He was a B-17 pilot. He was shot down twice. The History Channel did something about him. So they said, at the time, when he came back, and the crew survived both times, they said, Lieutenant Wentz, we're sending you home. It's too expensive. It was pretty amazing. But we had, Jack Coy had people called bent arrows, and these were people who had other careers. And our school thrived on these people. We had a medical writer from the New York Times that decided to go into medicine. We had nurse anesthetists who decided to become physicians. We had electrical engineers, and then there was me. So, but when you sat in that class, I would say there were 80 of us, and they told us they expected everyone to graduate. And at this time, other schools had a pyramid system where there was a curve, and 1/3 of the class didn't continue. So it was really, really a good experience. I will tell you one thing. Even though my dad paid every bit of I never had to work, had another job. But I got a job at Mount Sinai Hospital on Sunday morning as a phlebotomist. And I was great. I mean, I could get blood out of whatever. The problem is they would call me when they couldn't start an IV. So, but in medical school, we had to draw blood from I'm not going to mention any names because I remember it to this day, and he became a famous person. But we had to draw blood from our lab partners. Well, and they showed a film, you know, how to do it. So I had a black and blue arm, and when it was my turn to draw blood on Mr. B, he said, you know how to do this, I got to go. So, you know, that's one thing to remember for a long time. But one thing I'll tell you also, Jack Coy, he really, when he bet on somebody, you were going to get through. If there was a problem in a committee and they thought you were something, he'd talk to you, but they, you know, he made it clear that you were staying. And that was a great way to be in medical school, I can tell you that. Now, the second moving force in this, I wanted to do something for the medical school. I always realized how important it was and what a ticket it was to other places. You know, going to a residency and going to Boston, it was very helpful. But, and I won't take too long, but I have already, but the moving force for doing something was when my wife developed Parkinson's disease. And I can tell you, it just started. She was driving her car, and when her left hand would tick a little bit. That's all it was. And she got in the habit of guiding the car with her right hand. And then eventually, the tremor had a certain amplitude. She had no other symptoms, cognitive symptoms, for a very long time. And her neurologist said, you know, Judy, the one thing you have to understand is this is not a unilateral disease. And boy, was he right. So eventually Dr. Riley suggested that she would be a good candidate for deep brain stimulation. And Jonathan Miller had just come back here, he's a neurosurgeon, from his fellowship. And I'll tell you, don't be afraid of young guys. Because he said, you know, Judy, I think we can do something for you. And of course, this is what I faced when I came back here to do retinal surgery. You know, I looked like I was in high school. So they said, oh, this is a specialist in retinal surgery. So I had to, lose some hair to try to look old. The next thing, though, I can tell you, Judy had deep brain stimulation. Dr. Riley was about 6 months out of his fellowship, and he got her through it. It was really remarkable. I'll tell you the other thing is, when you want to know how to get along with women, if you've got that program, for the deep brain, I mean, you shut that thing down, and it's really. I'm glad Judy isn't here, she'll come for dinner. Now, the only thing left was to provide the money. And my dad was helpful in this. And I also want to thank Dan Neiditz, who was my best friend in college, who was here, came all the way from Hartford. And my uncle, Sam Tilles. My family was in the real estate business on the west side. Sam's, that was my mother's brother, his father died in 1932, right in the middle of the Depression. Sam got a job with the Cleveland Trust Company, and he gave his whole salary to pay a few bucks on some of these properties. They didn't want the properties back, they just wanted, some action on every mortgage. So he was able to hang on to it. And he had a lot of faith also in capitalism in the United States. Now there were no, now we kind of Google Yahoo Finance, and boy, you can see, every morning he would go over, his office was downtown, and every morning he went over to the library. And the only way you knew about companies was to read, what was in the library. So he managed, and he really lived very frugally. He never got over the Depression. And when Sam had to move from the Fenway Hotel, which was taken over by Western Reserve by the hospice as a main office, I had to move him to Meyer Towers. And the things he owed, aside from his stock portfolio, were 2 carfuls, that's all. So he lived very frugally. He lived there, and he couldn't, I'll tell you an interesting thing, he couldn't cross Cedar, from Meyer Tower to get the bus to go downtown. So he wrote to the mayor, and he got